Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jarrod Kimber, who you can find pretty much everywhere. Apologies for the massive delay, guys. Jarrod was in a meeting and we couldn't have started before it ended. And we've got...
It would have been weird if we did.
Yeah.
And it was just you talking on your own. And I'm on a separate meeting, but we recorded the whole thing.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you, guys, for being patient. We've got Abdul TS, Sag, Dhruv, Varun, Vignesh Ram, Savgi, Arko, all in the comments. So yeah, 42 minutes. Thanks for waiting, guys. And we have... a lot of things to talk about today, actually, because there's been a lot of off-field news. And let's start off with South Africa's revenue bump, Jarrod. $45.6 million US profit for the 2023-24 season for Cricket South Africa after they had recorded 3 years of losses, which totaled to over $30 million US across all 3 years. So that's quite massive.
So I run my own business, obviously. You're watching or listening to that business right now. I think the hardest thing in business is knowing, and especially in cricket, I've got some friends who make a lot of money during the IPL, for instance. But for the next 10 months of the year, they don't really know if income's coming in. And they're not always 100% sure they're going to get the same amount of money from IPL next time as they did last time, right? That's the biggest problem within cricket, is the way that the income comes in. And South Africa's problem is that they've made all this money because they played India. And so they now have to have India come and play them again to be able to do this again, to make this work again. And it's like, it's not a tenable situation to be doing. Realistically, they should be making roughly the same amount of money every year from a global rights package. So it's great that they've made a lot more money. But I know what the issue is, and I know what the problems are. And you know, if you're running that company, you are thinking, what if India can't make it next time? Or what if Virat Kohli and Rohit retire and the next stars don't make us as much money? Or our team isn't very good, so Indians don't care about watching it, or whatever that may be. It's just not a tenable business situation to be in, that you have to play India to make sure that your finances are level. Now, SA20 has played a big part in also, and that's why these leagues do this, because they're trying to be more level, and that's why
it's played a part, Jarrod, because it contributed just over $3 million US. So while there was revenue and profits coming in, it's not like the SA20 is the reason why that number is so high. To your point, hosting India for 2 test matches was the big one. And also, the broadcasting rights helped, right? That revenue brought in 54% of the revenue. But again, India is tied to that. And the 2024 Under-19 Men's World Cup also gave Cricket South Africa a boost. But they won't be hosting that every year, right? Yeah. So it's not tenable, to your point.
I think the SA20 thing, what I would say is that Big Bash started making a loss. I think the 100 might have made a loss at the start. I can't remember. Even the IPL made a loss. If you really go back in that first couple of years, certainly the owners did anyway, if not the league. You assume over time that you will get to a steady amount of income. It's why all these boards love these leagues, because it is a steady income. But when it comes down to it, what's a success for SA20? Is it $50 million a year? Right? Maybe $80 million a year, with people like, I know, Dinesh Karthik getting involved, and maybe those sorts of level of players filter through. That's still a long way short of what they're going to make just by having India tour. And that's the issue that cricket has. And that's why the rights structure for Test cricket specifically, but all bilateral cricket really, doesn't help any of these boards. And they had the chance of fixing all this, and they didn't do it. And so they just have to continue to beg that India keep touring them. And then if it's ticket sales, you beg England. So England sells tickets. and India sells TV rights, no other board, including Australia, no other team in the world really changes your bottom line in that year.
Yeah, and that's the same story for a lot of cricket boards. Of course, South Africa are scheduled to host India for T20s in this, season. So they are expected to generate over 8 million US dollars per game. That should help them for this coming season. But to your point, there will be seasons where they won't play India. And the SA20 is young, of course. It's in its infancy, even. We've had, 2 seasons? So you can expect the brand to grow. But to what extent? Especially in a world where T20 cricket is proliferated to the point where, apart from New Zealand and Zimbabwe, even Zimbabwe have the T10 or whatever, all of these countries have their own leagues. So it's tough to build a brand because it's the IPL and then everyone else, right?
Yeah.
So to become the second or third best one only gets you, a margin that maybe cannot help sustain your entire cricket, if
And
I'm
that's
reading
the
this
thing.
correctly.
Like, what did I say? $80 million. I think $80 million a year. What did they make? What was their profit this year?
45.6 million USD overall.
Yeah. So $80 million, I said before, is untenable, right? Like, I mean, I'm more talking in 20 or 30 years' time. They would have to make $10 to $15 million a year off SA20. I don't see that as an option going ahead. I don't see them doing that in the next 5 to 10 years. As I said, after that, who knows? Because, there'll be more money in all these industries. But as I currently understand the industry, that's not going to happen. And so you're in this situation where you have regular income, but it's small income. And then they will get money from the ICC, of course, as well, as part of the overall rights thing there. That is a little bit more understandable and a little bit more repeatable and everything else. Maybe those two together and occasionally India. The problem is, and I can tell you this because I've talked to a lot of boards, the problem is that these boards factor in how much they're going to make off India. And sometimes they don't make that money off India, right? As I said, India might send a B team. India might be losing. It might not be, they might be up against something else that's going on in India, like a reality TV show. There are little things that can really affect how much you do it. There might only be one company in India who wants to show it that time, right? All these things do. And what I've been saying to boards over years is you should be looking at that money as a bonus. And when you get it, how best to invest it. But what they usually factor it in. And then if something goes wrong, they're left completely holding, their genitalia in their hands, right? And so that's the issue here, is that the system is stupid, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense the way that we do it at the moment, and it's not good for India because the Indian players have to play too much. It's not good for England as well; their players have to play too much, and it's no good for anyone else. So it's not a good sustainable system that we have, and the amount of money that South African cricket needs per year it's going to be quite a lot, right? Like, just to try and catch up. And I've tried to talk to some of these boards before about, like, you're trying to win a space race against USA and Canada when you're like, I don't know, the Cook Islands. Right? I don't know why I said USA and Canada. I don't know if Canada actually were involved in the space race. I think I meant Russia or China, but either way, Canada.
Those were the ones.
Maybe Canada was involved in the space race and I've forgotten. But and you're the Cook Islands and you're trying to get to the moon. It's like, I'm not saying don't aim for the moon, but let's be realistic. Let's start by making sure that you've got paved roads, and the schools are really good, and got good standard of living. And so I've seen these boards before. They're desperate for this Indian money, and then they splurge it, and then they get themselves straight back in a hole again. I don't think that is the best way of running your cricket in 2024.
Yeah, I think the paved roads and schools analogy was right on the money. And if you really think about it, to your point, in a utopian world, you would have a system to generate income, and then everything on top would be what you get from India. You wouldn't have to rely on it, which is not the case. They do rely on it. And, to your earlier point, perhaps, Dinesh Karthik coming and playing the SA20 brings in an influx of other Indian cricketers who will in the future play the SA20, because those two boards are, quite close together. And we can, we've seen the IPL being hosted in South Africa in the past as well. So perhaps, they can tap into that market more and make the SA20 more profitable. But right now, we don't know any of that stuff. All we know is that, South Africa has made a lot of money because those Indian games really helped them.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving forward to England, oversized bats were in the news. Jarrod, Essex have been docked 12 points by the Cricket Discipline Commission, which have all but ended their hopes of winning the county championship. There weren't a lot of hopes to begin with, but they're done now.
Yeah.
And that was because back in April, opening batter Feroz Khushi's bat was adjudged too wide for professional cricket. Few things over here. First, I want to ask you, is this a touch too harsh, 12 points? And secondly, how would you have that conversation with bat manufacturers at this point? Because they should be held liable too, right? How can they get this wrong?
It would probably be a bat that was made for him personally. So most bats are handmade, and he, they made a mistake, and I don't know the full reason. Maybe it swelled up weirdly, or got some moisture in it and changed size, or when they were making it, it just it didn't sit there. I'm not an expert in those sorts of things when it comes to bats, but yeah, I think it's definitely a situation where. Did they win 12 points in that game? Is that what they won from that game?
Was it? I'm not quite sure. It was a game in April, so a while back.
So if it's that game, I don't think it's a bad penalty. I know a lot of people will say it's a bad penalty, but if it's from that game and they won it and one of their players had a bat, there's no reason to have a bat that's too big, right? Like there really isn't, that. I think, isn't that fair if they went into the game with an unreasonable advantage over every other player that they lose their points? Or am I because people seem really upset about this penalty, but I would have thought, I don't think they should lose 12 points arbitrary, right? Like if they didn't win, they won like 4 points in that game. I'm more than happy for them to lose the 4 points in that game. Right?
Or might be worth checking how many points they lost in that game. But, to me, at least, the way I look at it is that we had this conversation a few years back, didn't we? About bat sizes. Like, this is not news. We've been there before. So after all of that, there really isn't any excuse to get this wrong. I don't know if Essex should be held liable. Feroz Khushi is the person who should have been more careful, or it's the bat manufacturer. But to your point, maybe it was a customized bat, because they do that quite often, right? We see that with major players.
Yeah, I mean, I see why you've said that, but when it comes down to it, you are taking the bat out to the middle, right? They can find the bat. I mean, the bat manufacturer's maybe not going to get as many jobs as he used to get, right?
Yeah.
Fine. I think we can all accept that one. But I'm just having a look now. So yeah, it looks like Essex won that game by 254 runs. That bat really came in handy. He made 18 in the first innings and he made 32. So he's made 50 runs and they've won by 254 runs. But, we see those sorts of things happen before. Like there's no reason why his bat wasn't at the right size. Again, the team allowed a player to go out with, the umpires noticed this, yeah? This is you might have followed the story more than I have. My knowledge of it was the umpires noticed that the bat looked a bit wrong. Right?
Yeah, I think that's the story. And also Varun in the comments is saying that half the available points, including bonus points, were docked.
Yeah. That seems fair to me. I don't have any big issue with that. You went into the game with illegal equipment. Like if you're in the Olympics, yeah, and you go in with a cycle that is illegal, you don't win the gold medal.
Yeah. Also, let me take this one step further. You are boarding a flight. The hand luggage has certain dimensions that are allowed. When you are not, or you're crossing those dimensions, they tell you to check in the bag, right?
I think there's an element there of, there's a few things in cricket. I'd be interesting to know how often this happens, right? We don't check people's bats. No one, as far as I'm aware, no one has to have their bats checked. And you know how I feel. I know that there's a lot of spinners in the last 5 to 10 years who've been putting sticky stuff on their fingers to get the ball to spin more, right? And I went to the ICC and I said, I can tell you this is happening. These guys have told me. I've seen it. And then we saw Jadeja do it on the field, right? Like we have seen people do it before. And you talk to the ICC and they're like, oh, it's too hard. And it's like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be making sure that these players don't go on the field with a bat that is too. So if this has happened once, how many other players have done it and no one's noticed would be my question. Yeah. And I don't know if it's a massive advantage or anything else. You could argue that he might have got slightly more edges to play in misses.
Yeah, I was going to say, some of those balls that would have missed the edge might have caught it. So
I
there's another
remember
angle to this.
Andy Zaltzman, remember when the big bat thing became really huge? Andy Zaltzman and
Yeah.
I were doing a podcast at the time, and his big thing was, if you think about an old-fashioned cricket bat, it's actually very hard to get an edge. You have to get the edge on the front, right? Because there's no back of the edge, because it's like, millimeters thin, right? Modern bats, have a look at how many times people get an edge on the back part of the edge, because there's so much more edge to hit, right?
True.
No one ever talks about that, but it happens quite a lot. And the other thing is, when we used to watch cricket in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, you mishit a ball and you were never caught because it landed like a foot in front of you. It was really hard to actually mishit a ball and spoon it up in the air. Everyone spoons balls up in the air now, right? Now, sometimes they go for 6 and sometimes they go flying over the ring. So many extra players are caught. We never factor all those things in. That has nothing to do with this argument, this particular thing, but I just wanted to bring it up. But yeah, I think probably the best way to do it is just the umpires have a look, and maybe it could be runs penalty.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense. However many runs were scored off the bat are just docked off, and then you see what happens.
But they have to be docked off at the time.
Yes.
You can't do it at the end of the game, because they would have won this if you do it that way.
I'm going back to airports again, but maybe have one of those machines which the bat goes through and it just measures all the dimensions.
I don't even, I think, I'm sure there's an easier way of doing that, but that's what I was thinking. But yeah, essentially, if you're on 74 and they can have a look and go through it, and they're just like, well, you can continue to bat, but you go back to 0 and your team loses all 74 runs as well. I just think people would take it a little bit more seriously. And also, it's September, and that happened in April. Let's say Essex were in a serious position to push on. It's like, did it really take you 5 months to work out what had happened here? I don't know. It's not. I don't think they've handled it very well.
I'm afraid about Feroz Khushi and how he'd be treated after this, right? Because they'll be like, you cost us 12 points or whatever. But anyway, the club president of Essex, Keith Fletcher, wasn't particularly happy. He wouldn't even be happy if he heard our conversation on this podcast, because he called the ECB stupid and he accused them of flexing their muscle. And this was a Cricinfo headline, which really made me chuckle a bit.
Yeah, look, that's kind of what he has to say. He's backing his player. I've got no issue with him backing his player, but yeah, look, he should have gone out on the field with the correct equipment. I mean, that's just, we all know that.
Yeah. Bat measuring robots. Bring them to us, ICC and all the parties involved. Anyway, more news from England, Jarrod. Of course, we all know that Jos Buttler is out injured currently, and England have a 5-match ODI series coming up versus Australia, and they've named Harry Brook as captain of England for the series. Now, this is exciting because there are multiple things at play over here. A, that Brook hasn't really played a lot of ODI cricket, right? There's that. Of course, he's young, but a lot of people in England see him as the future S-tier generational batter, right? I had a conversation with George Dobell back in July when I was in England, and he was also very keen to blood Harry Brook as a future leader for England. This is, I suppose, the point where it starts. How do you feel about it?
You know, it wasn't that long ago. I must have been on TalkSport, and it would have been with Bumble or Harmy or and John Norman would have been there as well. That I remember being a conversation of like, Harry Brook was nowhere near the leadership position. And so much so that like I was told this, this is a little bit of background, but I was told pretty strongly from people, no, he's not ever going to be a captain. He's not that kind of person. They don't see him as that kind of person. So it feels like a pretty drastic about face, but you look at their future, and if Sam Curran isn't an automatic player, and Ollie Pope doesn't play across all formats, I don't know how they feel about Zach Crawley, but I don't think they think he's an all-format player. I think they think he can be, but I don't think they think he is now. There aren't a lot of options, yeah? You're starting to run out of people. And so I wonder if this is just a punt and just to see how he goes. I would say in England, and England is not the only cricket culture that does this, but I think I don't think Harry Brook is seen as like a genius off the field. Like, I'm not slagging him off or anything. I don't think he's seen as like, I don't know, Mike Brearley, right? Or that sort of person. And I think in England, they think that a captain has to be a really intelligent person. Whereas we all saw Shane Warne, right? Like, Shane Warne clearly wasn't the world's smartest person in many different factors in his life, many different ways in his life. But he was a genius at thinking about cricket. And I think too many times in England, they probably have gone for the intellectual person rather than the person who is very good at making decisions on the field. Like, I mean, I'm not saying I'm not saying Ben Stokes is an idiot or Harry Brook is an idiot or any of these sorts of people, but maybe there is more of a move now towards that. Whereas, here's one for you about Brendon McCullum. When Brendon McCullum wasn't made New Zealand captain, there was an element of he wasn't quite the right kind of person. Right.
Yeah.
So they had an interview for captaincy, and I think it was just him and Ross Taylor, but there might have been a third or fourth person involved. But I know him and Ross Taylor went in. Ross Taylor went in with a PowerPoint presentation. This is what I want to do with the team. This is why I think I should be captain. Blah blah blah. McCullum rocked up, and did the interview as I was told at the time, casually, and just answered. He said, "You ask me anything, and I'll be able to answer it. This is how I want the team to play. Blah blah blah. But you guys ask whatever." And New Zealand were like, well, the other guy is quite professional, and you've come in like that. I don't even think Ross Taylor would argue now that he was a better choice, and he was not happy when he lost that job. But I'm not even sure Ross Taylor would argue now, right, that he's a better choice than Brendon McCullum. And so this all comes from the class system, of course, right?
Yeah.
And how you present yourself and everything else. I wonder if this Harry Brook is a thing of, wait a minute, he is a bit of a cricket genius when you look at the way he plays, right? As you said, potential S-tier player.
Yeah.
I wonder if that can come across. And I hope that's the way that cricket captaincy should be done. It shouldn't be done on how many books you could read. It shouldn't be done based on the what was the Giles Clark, Alistair Cook thing? He comes from the kind of family that we want the England captain to come from. You don't want that. That's all nonsense and bullshit. What is good is, it doesn't matter if he might be a complete mess in his private life. He might be not the smartest person in any other way, but is he a cricket genius, right? Is he a tactical genius? Is he an empathetic person who understands the plight of the lower players and can deal with the players at the top end? All those sorts of things. That's what you want. Give him some random stuff that doesn't matter all that much and see what happens, right? I think that, for me, that's a much better way of doing it. So good luck to him. I hope he is really, really good at it, because I do think that there is this, I always find it funny when you see someone like a very, the famous one is the Nick Knight interview of Brendon McCullum. I go back to this all the time, Behram. So Nick Knight has Brendon McCullum on in the peak of BMAC fever, right? And he's on, and they've got a Subutu set on the desk, and Nick Knight, who was quite well educated and speaks very well, and I remember there's this great story about John Inverarity saying, don't go back into cricket, Knighty. Go and do something else with your life, because you can do other things, right? Yeah. So, quite well thought of, Nick Knight. And he's asking Brendon McCullum all these, like, what would you do here? And McCullum's like, and McCullum's brain was just so wired in a cricket way. He was like 8 steps ahead of every Nick Knight question that Nick Knight could almost never catch up with him, right? And Nick Knight was a smart person. As I said, like, I've met Nick Knight. He comes across really well, and he's got a good broadcasting career and everything. And it's like, but the difference between the way the two brains are wired, right? And maybe if you did a straight IQ test, and those are racist and idiotic anyway, but if you did an IQ test, my assumption is Nick Knight probably comes out higher than Brendon McCullum, right? But that's more to do with education, classism, access to all these different things. But if you're talking about just solving cricket problems, Brendon McCullum's on a level that he's like top tier. He's like, Brendon McCullum, MS Dhoni, Owen Morgan, the way that those guys process information is, Arjuna Ranatunga, you go through those sorts of people, Stephen Fleming, they just process cricket information on a level that normal humans cannot. Some of them might not be, you may not want them to do your tax, right? Yeah. You may not want them to plan your backyard renovations, right? Yeah. You may not even want them to take your kids to the local park because they get lost. But cricket intelligence is a completely different thing. So I find the Harry Brook thing is a really interesting one from me when it comes to that.
That is a fantastic perspective, I'd have to say. And also, it's ironic that Brendon McCullum is the all-format head coach for England now. So he would have had a say in this, whether or not to give Harry Brook that role. And of course, it's not a lot of pressure because Buttler is the limited overs captain, as is. One of Buttler or Mott had to go, and Mott was the guy who was sacked, right? And we know that at least in the next few events, the ICC events that are coming up for England in limited overs cricket, Butler will be captaining the side. So Harry Brook has this opportunity to just go out there and kind of showcase his leadership skills and tactical nous. And he doesn't have to like completely sell everyone on the idea either. It could just be good experience for him. And if they are looking at him as a long-term prospect in both all format cricket as a leader, then this, I agree with you, is a very, very good opportunity to do so.
Also, just in general, like it doesn't cost them anything, right?
Yeah.
And they will at the end of this have a much better idea whether he can do it or he can't do it. And so that's a much better way of doing it than say, I don't know who else is in that squad, but giving it to a senior player who you know is never going to be a captain, right? Like, and we see teams do that all the time. I like the idea of, I like the idea of doing it with younger players, of just being like, okay, you're 24 and you're going to play for the next 10 years. It doesn't even matter if he can captain, right? He understands what it's like to lead a team.
Yeah.
All these things are important.
Yeah, I mean, when Ollie Pope was given the test captaincy job in Ben Stokes' absence, remember when we were discussing who were the potential people who could have gotten it ahead of Ollie? And I think Chris Wokes was the only name which kind of stood out because they don't have a lot of options. It's a similar story in the ODI team because there have been a lot of retirements and Butler is injured and Bairstow is axed. And there's so much going on over here that you've got to take a punt on someone. So might as well take it on the one guy who you think will play for England across formats for the next decade. So yeah, kind of adds up, I suppose. All right. Next thing that we have to talk about is an article that you actually shared with me. And it's very, very interesting because the head of the anti-corruption unit, Alex Marshall, is set to retire. Marshall, of course, is a former senior policeman. And going out, he has warned that badly run domestic T20 leagues at a lower level remain a threat to the game as far as corruption and match fixing is concerned. I think we've talked about this like at least 4 to 5 times in the last couple of years, that when you see some of these lower level leagues, a lot of it comes across as dodgy. And he's gone out and he's basically given a warning. And I think not enough people are talking about this.
No, I agree. I think I'm gonna pivot slightly before we talk about this directly to talk about when we grew up, we would hear about athletes doping, right?
Yes.
And it was the athletes that were the biggest story. Like, this athlete dopes and this athlete dopes. And there was a little bit about China and East Germany as well. Don't get me wrong. But we very rarely looked into the systems, right?
Yeah.
And as it went on, we realized actually it was usually coaches or doctors or whatever that may be. But it might be, a whole facility might be under cloud. And this coach might be under cloud. And this doctor or this, dietitian or whatever it may be. And you realize that the systems are far more important. And so if you've got a young athlete who goes into a system and in that system there is fixing, right? They are more likely to be a fixer no matter who they are and no matter what their background is, right? If everyone around them is doing it and the other players are literally saying, this league doesn't matter, mate. It's an absolute joke. We're going to make 25 grand for a couple of weeks work. If the owner tells me to hit one ball up in the air, I'll hit one ball up in the air. It then becomes a thing, right? And that is the big issue that we have. And, we've seen it in county cricket. We've seen it in Pakistani cricket. We've seen it in South African domestic cricket. We've seen different levels where that's what happens. It isn't like a one-off of someone comes up to you and goes, can you do this, blah, blah, blah. It's everyone's doing it. It becomes a big thing. And it sort of spreads out within a team. Right.
Yeah.
And
very recently, the LPL and what was it? Praveen Jayavikrama for the A team. There's been a lot of news with respect to corruption and match fixing just like a month ago.
Exactly. And it's and the real issue is not the players. And the thing is that the players are the ones that get the press. The more interesting ones for me are the people who are involved in ownership or management or coaching or, all these sorts of things. These guys are getting picked up over and over again. But before that, they're going from league to league to league, right? I don't think there are many T20 leagues that are set up just for fixing, right? Because there are quite a few leagues that are also set up just for money laundering. So I don't think it's quite just for fixing, if that makes sense. There's tax avoidance, there's money laundering, and there's fixing. There is a combination of a lot of these smaller, tinier leagues that we see around are set up for these kinds of things.
A lot of
And
these Legends leagues I've heard are quite shady.
well, I don't know what's going on with the Legends League. I've told you that when I was offered a job of like being an analyst for a Legends League, and I was like, what do you want me to analyze? What am I going to do? Tell Brett Lee to bowl Yorkers? I mean, I don't even know if Brett Lee was in the league I was offered, but it was such a random thing of like, why are you paying analysts? Like, where's this money coming from? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And why would a 45-year-old former player want me to give them any advice in a Legends League? So you see these leagues pop up, and there is an issue, obviously. And you know, the next, you know, we don't have the resources to do this in good areas, but I would like to go from league to league and do a thorough investigative journalism job on trying to work out why the league exists. How does this league make money?
Yeah.
Right. So you've got a lot of leagues who make money via something called betting rights, which is illegal. That's actually a better way. And it sounds horrible, but it's betting rights, which basically means they will do a deal with a couple of major betting companies, and they will allow for them to have instantaneous data available to them so that those companies can advertise that if you want to bet on this thing, you might even be able to look at the thing. So if you go on Betfair or Bet365, quite often you'll have the actual game that you're watching, quite often on a fast stream, not always, but sometimes on a faster stream.
Yep.
Betting rights information, or be the major betting partner. If that's how cricket is making its money, why don't we know about that in cricket in general? Why is that not talked about? How would these smaller leagues that have no one at these grounds, right, and don't have huge TV rights and don't have big sponsors, how are they making any other money? And yet, you've got big name players turning up there, right? There's a little bit of rich guys having too much money, wanting to own teams and wanting to hang around with famous players. I get that. There's a little bit of that. But there's a big middle ground here of what is actually happening. And business people generally want to make money, right?
Yeah.
So the whole thing to me just doesn't ever quite sit right. And I really, as I said, I think the most important thing for me would be, I'd love to go around the world, have a look at every one of these T20 leagues and work out why they exist, how they plan to make their money, who is funding them at the moment, because they just can't be making money. And so when Alex Marshall comes out and says these smaller leagues are rife with fixing and, you know, the way they're run is involved in fixing, who's in charge? Right?
Yeah.
Who's in charge? So when there was, what was the league? There was a particular league that I was looking into, and like I talked to the ICC, and the ICC is like, we're not in charge. And I was like, but this league had to get certification. And they're like, oh yeah, but it's in a cricket country. If it's in a cricket country, like a test playing nation or a major nation, they can just run the league. And
but
I said, well,
not all of those leagues get T20 status either.
But also, I don't even know what T20 status means, by the way. Like, I'm not taking a piss here, right? Like, what is T20? Isn't T20 just a game of 20 overs that is played at a professional level? So all that sort of stuff, it doesn't make any sense. So you've got all these issues running through the game. So you and I could set up a league in Pakistan or England at the moment. As long as we get our local environment involved, we can run that league, right? So Major League Cricket and the USA Cricket, what are they called now? Cricket USA or whatever their new name is.
Like that.
That Major League Cricket really struggled to get their league up, right? But at the same time, some of the most incredibly dodgy looking leagues of all time were getting greenlit by the US Cricket organization. And you're sitting there going, so what have they had to prove, this company? And then you have a look at what happens in that league. We did a podcast. I did a Red Inker on one of them. And you're looking at that going, oh my God, no players should be involved in that environment. I'm not saying there was fixing. But what I am saying is professional players should not be in a position where that many amateur and unprofessional things are going on, because it does affect their career and everything else. And unfortunately, that is not the case, and that is not what is happening at the moment. And because of that, that's what we're seeing. That's what Alex Marshall is talking about, right? So some of these leagues at ICC don't have enough ACSU people to be able to sit down in the lobby and make sure that dodgy people don't come through the lobby. And that's like the base level of security, that you want,
Yeah.
right? That's like the it's like um it's really I don't think people understand just how bad this situation has got within cricket.
I mean, one begs to question that if not for the ICC or ACU, who would have to like cross check all the ownership and how these leagues are run and everything that you're talking about, which we don't have enough funds at good areas to kind of investigate? It should be someone's job, right?
So I don't want to slander the CPL here. The CPL will get a little bit upset when they get mentioned with this, but it is a league I know the insides of a little bit more than most, obviously, having worked there, being a general manager at a team and all that sort of stuff. The CPL allowed a bunch of guys to come in and buy teams where I think a base level of due diligence would have suggested these were very bad owners, right? But CPL
Like Alan Stanford level bad or just like a little less?
What's his name? The guy that owned Kingfisher, that used to own
Vijay Mallya.
So Vijay Mallya owned one. There was I've forgotten the guy's name, but the guy I worked for was another owner who was famously not very good. I think they were the only two. I think the other ownership groups at that time were okay. So they had one team that wasn't owned by anyone. I think the year I was there, and they had Vijay Mallya and they had my owner, whose name I've forgotten because he's no longer important in cricket. But so they had three different guys at three different teams that were run in a way that shouldn't have, that weren't run correctly, right? And so they knew that they had to get rid of Vijay Mallya. They're not idiots. Like, especially he had their most important franchise from a marketing point of view. He had Barbados, right? Not the franchise you want to give to a guy like Vijay Mallya. They weren't running it particularly well. The franchise I worked at didn't pay people on time or at all in some cases. They were completely unprofessional. They did lots of things that were really, really that the cricket team shouldn't do. And then you had another team that didn't have owners. So the CPL, when you have conversations with them, are quite honest. They're like, of course we have to get rid of these owners. My question was, how did these owners get in the first place? But then CPL couldn't be in a situation where they had three teams without owners because they then have to foot that bill and they're a business.
Yeah.
So I'm not blaming the CPL or any of these leagues when these owners come in, right? Because I understand that that's how business works. But if there is no one above the people who run the business going, no, we can't have this owner involved because of this person actually made his money running guns, right? I promise you that is a conversation that happened recently. There's another one of like, this guy owns a team with drug money. Again, that is a conversation I've heard in the last 7 or 8 years for one particular franchise, right? What are we doing? How are we allowing cricketers to be involved with these kinds of people? Where is the oversight, right? It's so unprofessional and it's so disappointing. And the ICC can't really do all that much because what the ICC will say, and they're right, is that when we go into these things, the individual team, like India, Australia, and England, don't want the ICC being involved with domestic leagues at all, right? The reason is that their domestic leagues don't have a lot of these problems or don't have the same kind of problems. And they don't want to share any money with the ICC. They don't want the ICC making any decisions or anything else. But the issue is that across the board, there needs to be an adult in the room who says, are you sure this owner has money?
Yeah.
Like,
also, just cross-reference everything. Like, just like, when you apply for a visa to a country, there should be a similar process when you apply to buy a team.
You would think so.
And your financials should be checked. And
I should say there have been owners that have been rejected at times, but not enough. And I don't think it's consistent. And what you're saying is, what you're talking about here is a word called due diligence.
Yep.
It's 2 words. It's 2 words, and I mispronounced the first one. Due diligence. I think I mispronounced the second one. Anyway, hopefully between those, people have understood. And I can tell you that it doesn't always happen, and that every time I've ever been involved with a franchise league outside of the Big Bash, right? I've been involved with conversations with people who run these leagues, right? And they will say to me, yeah, we've got a couple of good owners here, but we've got a couple of others that, and you're just like, well, you can't, this is not a sustainable thing. And it brings in, I'm not saying all those crap owners are legitimately trying to fix these leagues, but it brings in elements of a lack of professionalism. It brings in elements of randomness and everything else that cause massive issues, I think, right across the sport.
Yeah, and I hope that people have listened to this entire conversation and maybe gained some insight on this, because it's just one of those things that you don't really get to hear a lot about. And I'm not even sure if people have even read that Alex Marshall article, right? That he's retiring and he's going away saying these words. And anyone who's watched, franchise league cricket, particularly the T10 ones, I mean, you have every right to question some of the legitimacy of, these leagues. And there are times where anyone who is a keen watcher of the sport will pick up on potential moments where corruption could be a thing. Like, I remember
Also,
that conversation between you and Bumble where you brought up how, fine leg is up and you're feeding the batter's hip and you're a professional cricketer. Like, the math does not math.
yeah. And I think that the issue now is, I watched a conversation between my dad and my son, and they were talking about T20 cricket. And my son was trying to tell him, he thinks T20 cricket is better than Test cricket at the moment.
Of course he does.
Which is fine. He's 10, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
And my dad was saying, well, some T20 cricket is really good, but some T20 cricket is really ordinary, and some of it shouldn't exist at all. And he said, that's not really the case for Test cricket, right? Like, you can say, doesn't always make money, but it has a reason for existing. These two teams are playing each other. There's a bilateral agreement here. They're going to try and sell the rights. People are going to turn up. My dad didn't say all this, but essentially, that's what we were really talking about. That's not why this random T10 league in wherever, Oman, it exists, right? I'm not slandering Oman. They've done some great things in cricket, but I'm saying that's not why it exists. It exists for a different reason. And we don't know why that league exists, and why this league in the UAE exists, and why this league in Malaysia exists, and this league in Afghanistan exists, and this league in Canada exists, and this league in America exists, and this league in Zimbabwe. We don't know why they exist because we can't see them making any money. Yeah. Right.
And also, I often ask myself, who watches these leagues, right?
That's the other thing. So I've got, quite a few of my friends are in gambling, and they'll be like, oh, gamblers watch these leagues. But sometimes I'll have a look at, there was a game last night on that I saw, and I still don't know who the two teams were, but it was like the Stellenbosch Warriors against someone else. And I was like, it was on an app that I had, that I can watch live cricket on. And I was going, it took Stellenbosch. Okay. So I'm in South Africa. I understand that much. Mm-hmm. What am I watching? What level of cricket? I haven't heard of these players. Why is this just a development league? But people are betting on it because it was on Betfair. That was how I think that was how I saw the feed, because I was watching the Canada Nepal game. Right. And so I saw this other game, and I'm sitting there going, why does this exist? Why do we need cameras on this? What's the point of this? Is the camera just so it can go to Betfair? Is that how this game is funded? Not just Betfair. I'm assuming other companies would have had it as well. But you're just sitting there going, what is this? Why? And we don't know. And if I don't know, and you don't know, how is any fan supposed to know why any of these things exist? And so we are logically going to think that the vast majority of these leagues are dodgy. Yeah, they may not be. I know everything I've just said, this might count, but they may not be. I know lots of people who I trust, and I really like these people. They're involved with some of these leagues. That's fine. But for fuck's sake, Behram, there's no way you can watch a fucking Cayman Island T20 competition or T10 or whatever the fuck it was and not think to yourself, what are we doing as a sport?
Yeah, I mean, I can't personally watch any T10 competition, and that's a personal choice, because T20 is where I kind of draw the line. I can't go shorter than that. But of course, lots of food for thought for all of you guys as well. And just kind of wear that lens next time that you're watching some of these games, and question some of the things that are happening in this sport. Let's take a short break on this note, Jarrod. You guys are watching Uncovered with Behram and Jarrod. We'll be back after this short ad.
Thanks to the kind folks at FlexiSpot for looking after my office and my butt by sending me their E7 Pro desk that save your favorite desk heights at a touch of a button. You don't have to crank anything. This thing just finds the height that you like and you can work. And their BS12 Pro chair that supports my posterior while I'm recording, this ad and all my shows. If you need great desks, especially ones that change heights, or the best quality chairs, head on over to FlexiSpot today.
Welcome back to Uncovered, and you guys are with Jarrod and Behram. We still have a few things to discuss over here. Rest days are back, Jarrod, albeit in different circumstances. Of course, the last time we ever had a rest day was back in 2008, actually, during a Bangladesh-Sri Lanka test match in Bangladesh, because there were parliamentary elections running simultaneously to the test match. This situation is not too different from that one, because after day 3 of the first test between Sri Lanka and New Zealand at Galle, there will be a rest day. And I initially thought that the rain forecast might have been a reason, which made a lot more sense to me, honestly. But it's actually the presidential election in Sri Lanka. So, your take?
I mean, the reason rest days went was because it's not financially viable, right? It doesn't make sense. Like if you think about it, it doesn't work. And also, traditionally, rest days were on Sundays, and there was a Christian religion aspect of it, right? Like they do
Even God rests on Sunday or something.
Yeah,
like that,
WG
right?
Grace card that on a Sunday. And the funny thing about that is now of like, it just shows you how stupid sport was. It's like, we're going to give up one of our best earning days to not play on Sundays. And if you look across the Western world, a lot of sports were not played on Sundays in the Western world, traditionally. So I think that there is certainly an element of that. That's why they disappeared. And this one is probably, I think there should be a flexibility within Test cricket where we can have 4-day Test matches, 5-day Test matches, 6-day Test matches, matches with rest days for certain reasons. Because we all grew up, and I'm saying the vast majority of people who are listening to this podcast, who are watching us on YouTube right now, grew up in an era when 5-day Test matches were king. We think that's what it is. That's not what Test cricket has always been, right? New Zealand was still playing 3-day Test matches up until 1949, right? There's no reason not to have flexibility, and it could be. I really like the idea of perhaps the Test matches that are making a ton of money, we play those over 5 days, and we try and make as much money as possible. And the Test matches that don't make as much money, we play them from Thursday to Sunday like golf. We fit in the extra hours. Maybe they have to be played with a different kind of ball rather than the red ball. So if there are light issues or anything else, but we know that punters are going to be, more free to be able to watch that. Like I have no issue with Test cricket being like that, because that's what Test cricket always was. In England, the matches were completely different than the matches in Australia. They're two different countries. They have different kinds of results, right? And in England, you need short Test matches made sense because the wickets were usually really helpful to bowlers, and bowlers ran through. And in Australia, you needed the extra days because the pitches were better, because the sun would bake them, right? Like that makes sense. That's how cricket should be. But we've ended up with a sort of a cookie cutter by accident, right? As much as anything. And there's no reason for that. I like the idea of anytime there is a Test series that is 1-all, or 2-all, or whatever, or 0-all coming into the deciding test. Great, 6-day Test.
Yeah. When I was actually doing yesterday's live show with Estelle, previewing both Sri Lanka versus New Zealand and India versus Bangladesh. By the way, someone asked in the comments for us to talk on Sri Lanka versus New Zealand. It's been covered. You can go watch that video. Yeah. So when someone in the comments mentioned how there is a rain forecast in Galle, which is looking quite bad, that's where I just automatically assumed, my bad, I hadn't researched into the story yet, that's why the rest day was there. And it made sense to me. Then when I researched it, I was like, oh, there's an election. Of course, that's why there's a rest day, right? But I would like to see cricket kind of accommodate viewers around and players around rain, right? So if there is a massive rain forecast during a Test match, have a 6th day, which will only be used in case an entire day's play is washed out. Not like one of those days where 30 overs are played. If it's all gone, then you have, that's the only scenario in which you use the rest day.
The problem is the way we pack Test matches in you can't do that anymore, right? Because, you've got, what do we have, 3-day breaks between Test matches? You can't suddenly have a 2-day break, and now you're making the players go out for a further day. So the way that Test matches currently work, that doesn't exist anymore. So the only way to do it is on the last day. But the issue then is half the team is going out to play franchise leagues. Half the team is going out to play in a limited overs tournament. There's a training camp somewhere. Then maybe they're going to another tour. So it's still not ideal. So it has to be planned beforehand. And I can see India, Australia, and England doing it, as I said before, of just going, okay, we want the Ashes. We don't want the Ashes to be finished with a draw, if at all possible. And we certainly, do you remember the Manchester game between Australia and England in 2023, was it? And where there was just absolutely poured down with rain, ruined the whole series because England looked like they were coming back into the series and suddenly it was all over, right? If that's the last day, last test match, that no one ever wants to finish with that as the last test match. So getting yourself in a position to be able to do that, and also 6-day tests take away draws. Like,
it's better than playing till 10 p.m. or whatever at night, right? Which was suggested by someone from the England camp. I remember something like that. That why don't we just continue to play?
So the only way you can do that is, and this is another option as well. There are things that we can look at. Investing $10 million in pink balls to make pink balls roughly as good as red balls would be a huge advantage for cricket. Get SG, get Dukes and Kookaburra all working on them to see if they can do something good. Because then you can play later in night, right? Then you can play under lights. And we would get more cricket in and we can finish more games. We're not having problems with masses of draws anyway. So it's not like we need all of this. But I'm saying there are options that we can make cricket-based decisions, right? And so the 4-day games is a perfect example of that, of we can get through 100 overs a day if we have a ball that can be used in slightly worse light conditions, right? We can turn lights on and we can play with a pink ball. We can actually then have 4-day games when we need 4-day games, and we can have the availability for 6-day games. I don't think we ever need a rest day. This is different. But again, is the option here that if they don't have the rest day, maybe the test doesn't go ahead. So we should be allowed to have a rest day. So I think it's a sensible decision.
Yeah, it's like basically a stopgap solution, and they probably weighed all their options, and this was the most feasible outcome. But it would be really tragic and frustrating if there is absolutely no rain on the rest day, right? That would be a real kick in the ass.
If that's the only day that's dry.
Absolutely.
And you go back in history, there are some great stories of that sort of stuff happening, by the way, of like, the rest day being the best day in a test. Like, I think it might have been, was it the Mankad game? There was one of the games around when Vinu Mankad ran out Bill Brown. I can't remember if it was that game or the game before, but I remember I think it was that game. So the Mankad happens really late at night, and then the next day is washed out, and then the following day is a rest day. And so one of the reasons that the Mankad story made such news is there was nothing else to report from that game for it might have even been 3 days. It might have been 2 days of rain and a rest day. And so the only story that anyone could talk about was the same thing over and over and over again. You still got to get your column inches in, right? Still got to broadcast. You still got to do your thing. And so, so there have been some occasions where rest days, and one of the other most famous days in cricket history is the New Zealand rest day between New Zealand and South Africa, when the Wanganui, or is it, I forget, the train tragedy in New Zealand happens. That happens on a rest day. So there's been some really weirdly incredible rest days in the history of cricket.
Yeah, well, let's see how this one pans out. Coming to our final few talking points, there is some good news. Jarrod, cricket has become the only major team sport with equal prize money for both men's and women's World Cup events. And the winners of, upcoming World Cup events in cricket across both genders will receive $2.34 million as a winning cash prize, and the runners-up will get $1.17 million. And the overall prize pot for the upcoming Women's T20 World Cup 2024 has seen a mammoth 225% increase from the 2023 edition. This is huge.
Yeah. Is it?
I don't know. It sounds huge.
Here's my problem. We've been seeing this a lot with cricket, where there's a lot of thing about equal pay in cricket.
Yep.
The women get paid contracts, and the men get paid contracts, and the women's contracts are nowhere near the level of men's contracts, but their match rates in some cases and the prize money in some cases is the same. That is not where you make your money as a professional cricketer. You make your money through contracts. So it's a bit of a bait and switch. I'm not having a go at the ICC. Look, 2012 World Cup, Sri Lanka. I think it was Alison Mitchell who wrote this story. She was hanging out. The part of the women's and the men's tournament was separated, and then they came together at the end. So I think the women were playing down in Gaul from memory, and the men were playing more in Colombo and Kandy. And then for the finals, the tournament came back together. And I think it was Alison Mitchell, or it might have been Chloe Salto. I can't remember, but I remember it was definitely because they were both on those tours, if I remember correctly. And they worked out that the women were getting paid $35 per diem, and the men were getting paid $50 per diem. It might have been more than that, and the whole running joke was, "What are the women eating less? Are they doing less laundry? You're like, why do you think they need to be paid less money, right? Like, what a ridiculous thing." So to go from that to this is absolutely huge. But a professional woman makes her money from contracts, and until the contracts are parity, it's all kind of PR.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, you have to win the goddamn tournament or end up as runners-up to actually get.
It's not going to help the Pakistan women's team, is it?
Don't even get me started on the Pakistan women's team, because
not
the
though, is it?
PCB, yeah, the PCB has, like, you know, on one hand you have the equal prize money thing going on, and whilst there is, like, you know, a catch to it, as you have kind of told us, of course, the PCB have gone in a completely opposite direction, where they have decided to scrap the daily allowances of their women's cricketers when they report for national camps. So they will just be taken care of in terms of lodging and food, but they won't be given an allowance during those national camps, which is bizarre coming from a board which not like till long ago they said that how they're going to treat women's cricket equal to men's cricket, and they're going to invest 240 million PKR into women's cricket. Well, where is that money? And what about those overpaid mentors? Could some of that money not could that not have gone to the women?
I love that we're back with the mentors again. So this whole idea of parity, me and Raf Nicholson have done a podcast about this before on Red Inca. This whole idea of parity, it's not true, right? And so this is great in that it shows that there are people within cricket trying to do that. But realistically, the chances are that the winners and runners-up is going to come out of India, England, and Australia more often than not. Certainly, they're going to be at least 50% of those spots almost all the time, right? And they're going to be 100% of those spots half the time, maybe, right? And so it doesn't really help women's cricket the way that, I would almost, for me, I'd almost wonder if there's a better system where they could, instead of having, so what did you say it was? It was about 3.5 million across the winners and runners up?
Yes.
Every World Cup?
3.51 million. Yeah.
Every World Cup?
Yeah, that's what I've been told. Well, that's what the article said.
So $7 million every 4-year cycle. What would $7 million of investment in women's cricket do at the contract level, right across the game? So every woman has a universal basic income from the ICC.
Yeah.
Right?
That would be great.
I just think there are many more. And look, it's great, because this is where professional sport should be going. And I love the fact that cricket is finally ahead of the game when it comes to women's sport, when having been behind that game for fucking hundreds of years, since 1888, whenever the Reds and the Blues played. So I love that side of it. But realistically, if we're talking parity, this is not parity. It's a good PR soundbite.
It's a facade. I hadn't even thought of it that way. Estelle somewhere is watching this in Sri Lanka and has gotten her heart broken. Because
have I ruined everyone's thing?
I don't know. I woke up to Estelle's tweet and I was like, oh, this is uncovered fodder. Told Subo to add it to the list. And over here now you've just blown my mind, and it all seems...
So my mum said to me the other day, she was talking about women's cricket. She said, isn't it great that women get paid as much as the men now in Australia? And I'm not having a go at my mum. That's how it was presented in sports pages, right? That there was I think was it match payments? The match payments are the same. And I was like, that's not where they make the majority of their money. They make the majority of their money through contracts, right? And that's where their financial security is, through contracts. And what if, and the match payments are great. What if you're injured? What if the team wants to rest you, right? What if you get dropped, right? To be a professional, you need to know that you're going to get paid one way or another. Otherwise, you're not a professional and you're just getting paid as a semi-professional, right?
What about the Afghan women in Australia who won't ever get to compete in this tournament, right? There's so much to this.
We could take it all the way to that level if you wanted to. But the point being is that these boards are trying to do the right thing, right? And honestly, I do believe that in this case, but the reporting on it isn't always as accurate because it's not actual parity. They're not getting paid the same. What is actually happening here is that it's more a PR opportunity and a step in the right direction. And I don't want to shit on it because this is what boards should be doing. So I don't want to shit on the ICC, but I do want to point out that $7 million could be much better used in many different ways. I don't even know. I've always found weird about this. Does cricket need winners pots? Like winners prizes? I've never really understood what like that from that point of view. Because not all Olympians get paid to get a gold medal.
Yeah. And they present it in the headlines as if, this is a big move in terms of, gender parity. And don't get me wrong, of course it is if you are equaling the prize money. But you're not giving teams a level playing field because the best will win and the best will get the money and the best will get better. And the disparity will increase.
Yeah. So it's an equal playing field, right? It's like equal pay across men and women where you've actually made the haves and have-nots further apart.
Yeah.
Right.
Basically.
Now, having said all that, think about it from this point of view. I think that every board's slightly different, but I think that the players more or less and the team officials and everyone else share the winning prize. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's the case right across the board in cricket, but there might be some individual countries who have slightly different deals, but right across the country that does that. There is going to be a situation where there is going to be some fringe player from, Australia or India or England who is going to have their life changed if their team wins a World Cup. And what if West Indies or South Africa or probably not New Zealand these days, but what if Sri Lanka, come up and they manage to sneak their way into the final or win the whole thing? Think of how many women's lives could be changed. But at the same time, think of how many lives of professional women cricketers' lives could be changed if that money was distributed in another way. It's not parity. It's a step in the right direction. I hope that it does change a bunch of women's lives when they get a chance to get it. But there's a lot more that can be done.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And I mean, we aren't even considering Ireland, right? Who are doing so well, beating England and all that, and they're not.
Why don't they give all the money to all the Prendergast? I don't understand why $7 million every 4 years is not given to all the Prendergast.
They don't even have a shot at competing for this money. So that's just what makes this all the more sad. Anyway, that kind of wraps up all of our talking points for this episode of Uncovered. We do have a couple of super chats though, Jarrod. So let's take those. Aditya Mani Jha up first asks, who's going to Evan Galbis-proof the Indian ODI team? Dubey, Parag, Washington, Sundar, Nitish Reddy, assuming they aren't going to go back to Shardul. I mean, out of all of those guys, they've kind of gone for Washington in recent times, haven't they?
I think
post T20 World Cup, Washington's gotten pretty much every limited overs game.
Yeah, I think Washington is part of their future. I think Nitish Reddy was probably there and thereabouts. So I think those two will come through. They've got Akshar Patel in the short term as well. So he gives them more batting. They can, a Shivam Dubey. I think Shivam Dubey, if the ball was moving around in in New Zealand or England or South Africa, could be a handy bowler, right? I don't know if he ever gets to that Marcus Stoinis level, which is probably the level that would be very handy for them. Rian Parag, look, on those wickets that were turning sideways that no one could bat on, he was really, really good. Yeah. He has to be handy on flat wickets and he has to be handy in general situations. So, but maybe out of Dubey and Parag, you get 4 what Aaron Finch calls chop out overs, right? Of just like 4 overs of Detroitus that allows you to move the rest of your bowlers around a little bit more. But Washington and Nitish are the legit next level players, right? I still think Washington will end up being a fine Indian player. I know it because he started as a fetus. He's one of those people. I actually think now you're better off as an Indian cricketer to not be known before you're like 22 and 23 and you're already good. The worst thing that can happen to you is to be really good at 17 and 18 and everyone see you struggle. And then then you've played for India a couple of times and it doesn't work. And by the time you're 26 and 27, you become a really good player. Everyone's already out on you because you've been around for a decade. Yeah. So I think there's some elements there. But yeah, I think Washington and Nitish are I'd be really happy with those as future all-round talents. It's not quite what Australia have with that sort of weird factory line of Western Australian right arm medium bowlers, and it's probably not similar to what maybe the West Indies had as well. But you've got two guys who play in two different positions, who have very different kinds of skill sets. And then maybe if you get something out of Dubé and Parag in the future as well, then you've got something. I think Dubé and Parag have to be picked because they're good enough to bat.
Yeah,
right?
because they're going to give you 3 to 4 overs max in an ODI, let's say, right?
Every now and again, right? It's not even going to be consistent. Whereas I think with Washington and Nitesh, it is a little bit different. They are genuine all-round prospects, especially Nitesh, but I think Washington should be as well.
I mean, if a team is flooded with left-handed batters, Washington might even be bowling 10 overs in an ODI, right? Like, so he gives you proper balance in that regard. In a future where Jadeja is obviously going to be phased out, that's the obvious thing to do over here, right? So yeah, it's an interesting question, Aditya Manija. Love that you threw in the Evan Gulbis bit. All right, Path right winger asks, KKR 2020 was a bad team until Venki and Varun came in the second half, taking it to the finals. They would help KKR eventually pick the title in 2024. Do you think McCullum would do the same with a Crawley and Bashir?
Was 2020 the season that was split?
I think it was 2021.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I can't remember. Some people in the comments, like Varun has asked Parth that wasn't that in 2021, and then Rahul has said it was in 2021.
Oh, okay.
I don't think I follow this conversation entirely.
So basically, there was a season in which Kolkata were absolute arse. And then they end up making the final, I want to say. Yeah, there you go. Well, he says second half, take it to the finals. And I've mentioned it a couple of times because they were arse under McCullum, and then they were great under McCullum. And we don't have a huge amount of him coaching white ball cricket.
Yeah.
And, you know, in T20 cricket, you can just catch fire and everything. I think Venki was an unknown, and he brought Venki in. And we now know how limited Venki is, although I thought he had a decent season this last year. But I think we know how limited he is. But do you remember people were so excited about him? And I was like, guys, he's like an anchor who slogs. Like, I know, like he's overall, his development last year I thought was really good. But up until last year, I was like, he's not at the level that everyone was excited about.
I mean, we noticed in this IPL that he was the standard deviation king, right? It was either single-digit scores or quick 550s. There was nothing in between.
Some of us might have made some money off that. So, and then and Varun come in, and Varun was a mystery bowler, right? So you've got an element of the fact that it's not as easy to face. So you've got one guy that no one knows that much about, and another guy who no one has faced all that much. That's not the case with Crawley and Bashir, right? Yeah. But I do think McCullum will look at it slightly differently. So I think we started this episode about this. McCullum is a problem-solving cricket thinker, right?
Yeah.
He's the sort of person that I'm sure I don't want to slam, Freddie Wild and all the other analysts who he's worked with, Nathan Lehman and everything, but I'm sure at some stage they've come to him because this is what analysts do. Analysts come with that problem, right? And it's just like, look, this is happening, blah, blah, blah. And the best coaches are really good at going, okay, but we can do this, right? And McCullum is absolutely brilliant at that ability to go just switch on a dime and go with something else. So I don't know if it's going to be Crawley and Bashir, right? But it may be looking at it a different way and thinking about it from a different element of, okay, we can't do this, so let's try and do this, right? A, B, C haven't worked for us. What about D, G, and I don't know, J? Like, let's go with different plans and go with that. And I think that's where McCullum is really, really good. On top of he backs players and, he puts people in a good environment and he makes people comfortable and he makes them feel like they can walk on water at times. But I think
he gives them cigars when they do poorly.
Cigars and champagne, yeah. But I think the other side of it is that it is his ability to go, okay, well, we've already tried ABC. It doesn't work. Let's go somewhere else. And not all coaches are like that. Coaches are like, well, actually, eventually A, B, and C, they're the best plans, so we're going to go with them. Whereas McCullum is much quicker to cycle through things. And I think that's what we'll see with England. And I think that's what we saw with Kolkata, right? It wasn't working. They were absolute arse, right?
Also, one thing to consider over here, sorry I'm interjecting, but Path, Kolkata got 2 worldy seasons out of Narayan and Russell and no one saw that coming. There's a bit of that element as well.
Did they in 2021? I can't remember.
Not in 2021. I'm talking about 2024, right?
But he's talking about 2021 when McCullum was involved.
Okay.
Yeah. No, but
Got
you're
it.
right. But what you've just said is also true. That's the thing that's why it's so hard. Like, we've just done a video on the main channel about the best coaches in the world, right? And I'm sure you and I will do a foot marks in it. It's like, how do I know that McCullum was a great coach here? How do I know that there weren't just injuries and he had to turn to other players, or bad form, so he had to turn to other players? Those other players ended up in the best form of their life, and you end up being really good. Is that McCullum's genius, or was there no one else to pick? Right. Yeah. And those are the sorts of things we can't answer any of those.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, we've got a final super chat and then we're going to call it a day. Anish asks, Jarrod, did you get your check from Babar yet?
So I've been doing this for a very long time, right? And Behram is a lot newer than I am. And so I still get a little kick when I have done something and I see a team try it out on the field. Right. Yeah. And I know that, occasionally I've even had players and coaches. I remember I got this great message from this big name player at one stage going, did you see this on the field? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, we got that from you. And I was like, okay. I couldn't even remember having said this thing, but obviously I said something and he did it. And I was like, oh, that's great. But I love, even when I'm an analyst, I love doing that. What I don't like doing is tagging players in things and pushing things. And because I saw a lot of people do that in the early days of Twitter, and it always felt a bit icky to me. So you'll never see, you'll never see me tag a player in or anything like that. But when you do something like that Babar project, you do actually want him to see it, right? Because I don't know if it's right or not, right? Clearly he has changed, and so there is an element of him changing his footwork based on that video.
And we will be talking about that in the foot marks later, so you guys can, stay put.
But I don't know if it's right. Maybe we've come up with the wrong answer, right? Or anything else. And and obviously there are conversations to be had between me and other players at times, of which I've given them something that is wrong, but it's triggered something that's got them to the right position, right? And maybe that's what this is. But it's really exciting. But it's really exciting for me watching Behram and Varun and Cheyenne go through this for the first time, right?
Yeah, it is an alien feeling.
You're watching the screen and you realize that the thing that is happening out on the ground maybe has something to do with the work that you did. It's a very different feeling than anything you ever get normally in media. It's so... I've been called out in media for stuff. Like, I mean, in a good way. Raul Dravid and Sanjay Mandraker and someone but mentioned this video. And, sometimes, Bishop and Dooley have mentioned my name and stuff, right? And Butch and these sorts of people, they might mention my name or my website or my work or whatever. That's lovely. And it really helps your career. Don't get me wrong. But there is something very cool about looking up and seeing something happen that you have done the work for or whatever. And the story about and we won't go into it because this team's very upset at it now, but there was a team who obviously, contacted me at one stage. I helped them out. We then mentioned it and they got very, very upset that we mentioned it. And they were like, no, we came up with all these ideas on our own. But it doesn't matter to me whether they took any team, whether they look at a YouTube video or listen to a podcast or read an article and then go and do it, whether they've been inspired by me or they haven't. I love the fact that if I've come up with an idea, that it's then playing out on the field, right? Because I am a cricket fan and a nerd at heart, right? That is where all of this comes from. So for me to be the guy sitting in the MCG and having Trevor Hohns come over and ask me what I think of Corey Richards' batting when I was a kid was one of the greatest moments of my life, right? Have this. I didn't even realize it was Trevor Hohns, right? Random guy comes over and then suddenly I'm talking to the Australian selector. And from that moment forward, it was a really cool thing. I like doing it in club cricket as well, of like, you'd be talking to the coach and be like, have you thought about just playing this player in this role? And then they do it and he makes runs the next game or takes wickets the next game or that fielding position works for them or whatever. So I love doing it on every level. And to be able to do it at this level is great. But for me, it doesn't matter if Babar saw the video or not, right? What matters is that we clearly notice something that is quite important and that he has changed. And if it is, if he has managed to see it and that was part of it or the catalyst, it's also possible that he didn't see the video at all, but someone else saw it and said to him, have you thought about this? You used to be quite open up in your stance and you're quite closed up and it's affecting blah, blah, bblah, all the things that we talked about. Babar hasn't even seen the video. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It could very well be the case.
More than possible that's happened. That doesn't. And it's also possible that in the time that I started looking at it, someone close to Babar being a batting coach, an assistant, a personal coach, a friend of his, an analyst, was doing exactly what I was doing. Why is Babar not making any runs? Right?
Yeah.
And they did it, and it has nothing to do with us. I get no more joy out of the fact that Bubba's sitting there on his phone watching our YouTube than I do out of the fact that we noticed something that someone else in that setup noticed and it got through to him. It doesn't matter to me if it's from us or not. It matters to me that we are doing work on this channel that other people are simply not doing.
Yeah.
Right? That
Jarrod
we are getting to a
Kimber,
level.
Jarrod Kimber, aka the Toe Whisperer. And I mean,
Well, I mean,
it
also,
was-
we should get t-shirts made of just Babar Azam and a toe and start selling them.
just a big foot with the toe being Babar's face would be hilarious. That's a great t-shirt. But yes, I mean, look, I was not the one who cracked the toe. It was all Jarrod, of course. But just being a part of a project which has an impact in the real world. And, you know, I tried my best to get this analysis to Babar. I don't know if that's how he saw it or whether or not he saw it just like Jarrod did. But clearly he made an adjustment. The adjustment alone gives you a thrill. And that feeling is so alien. It's something I've never experienced before in my life. And it feels like, you know, you had a bit of a role to play, even though I had nothing to do with the toe, right?
No,
It was
well,
all
you
you.
did. No, because if it wasn't for you guys telling me I had to do the stupid video in the first place, I didn't want to do it, right? And I had to. You guys pushed me because there were 3 of you who knew a lot more about Babar Azam at that stage than I did. So it's a team. There 4 of us wrote it. It's probably one of the first pieces where we've had 4 different people write it, right? Like an American sitcom. There were so many of us in that kind of thing. Look, I remember working for the Melbourne Stars when we played the final, and I was talking to one of my best mates and to Dan Bredig. That makes it sound like Dan Bredig's not one of my best mates, but what I mean is I was talking to one person in cricket once out of cricket, and I had this, and I'd sent the plans for each batter. Right, this is what you must do. This is what you must do. And the first 5 wickets that the Renegades lost were exactly to my plan. Now, do I know that Scott Boland and Dan Morrill and whoever, I can't even remember who all of our bowlers were in that. Jackson Bird might have been playing, I think, in that one as well. I don't remember if, I don't know if they saw my plans, right? I don't know if they didn't come up with the similar plans, whatever. But I still remember that. It's like one of the greatest moments where I'm just like, oh my God, they've got another wicket with exactly what I've told them to do. Oh my God, they've got another wicket with exactly what and it's like that for me is like, it justifies all the work that we do, right? The amount of research that goes into all of these different things, like, you know, Varun, just the amount of random questions we ask Varun, and like Cheyenne is like, he's questioning and testing every element, and then, you know, Behram's involvement and my involvement, and, you know, and then it might be a piece with Estelle or CS or whoever, like all the different people who work with it, justifies the fact that we put a lot more work into one video than most people in the industry can put into their stuff. Right.
Yeah, and what really makes me happy is that whenever we're discussing something before it actually becomes a piece, there's so many different perspectives and people bring up so many different things that need to be looked at with respect to, you know, analyzing that particular player or, you know, team or whatever, that it kind of, you know, gives you an environment where you're not only like able to nerd out to an extreme, but you're learning constantly. And it's just really helpful in all different ways. And
there's one other thing I want to say too, is I saw a lot of people slandering Bubba and the PCB and people who had worked with him, right? I have been an analyst for a team where probably something really, really obvious was happening that I missed, right? I've got 15 people to worry about. I've got 100 people in the opposition to worry about. I've got relationships with coaches. I've got all these different things happening. This star's out of form, and there's a part of me that's just like, well, he's a star. He'll work it out, or he'll come to me, right? Then you've got things like, it's possible that the analyst went to Babar at one stage, but Babar was like, well, I've made this change on purpose. It's not an accident, and I don't think it's the problem. And the analyst went, oh, fine. A batting coach, maybe one batting coach comes in and says to Babar, I want to work on this. And Babar's like, I don't want to work on that. And then that batting coach gets fired because it's Pakistan, and there's probably been 24 batting coaches in that period of time. It's not as simple to say that is the case, because we see major teams make these sorts of mistakes over and over again. And sometimes it is just dumb luck that suddenly a player works it out, like, and then handles it and changes what they do. So I do think that the PCB's treadmill of nonsense has played a part in the fact that he hasn't fixed this before, right? But I also don't think that means that every batting coach he worked with was an idiot. Every analyst he worked with an idiot, or that Babar Azam is an idiot. If anything, I think probably more likely, maybe a couple of people have mentioned a few different things to him.
Yeah.
And he's just like, well, I don't believe that's the issue. And you're out of a job now anyway, while we're mid-conversation. And there's been 2 more batting consultants while we've had this conversation come in. But I do think it's really important to note that, like, I'll finish it with this story. So the death lineup, or whatever that, I forget what they ended up calling it, but there's about 4 different names for it at the moment. But the Golden State Warriors, when they ended up with their small ball lineup, when Draymond Green played center, and then they had basically the 4 guys who could all shoot 3-pointers and defend and everything in the other positions. When they came up with that lineup, it wasn't Steph Curry, basketball genius. It wasn't Draymond Green, basketball genius. It wasn't Steve Kerr, basketball genius. It wasn't Mike Brown, basketball genius. It wasn't all these incredible people involved with it. It was, I think, someone from outside the basketball department who said, you have to play a center. Because we're really good when we play Draymond Green with a bunch of people who are running around him. He can defend the basket, and then we don't have a weak offensive player because he can pass and everything else. The idea that there's so much going on when you're running a professional sports team and you're dealing with all these things, that sometimes it can be something complete from the outside. And I remember thinking at the time, so Trevor Bayliss used to read all of George Dobell's columns, right? I don't know if he read mine, but I know he read all of George's because he saw George as an outside voice.
Yeah,
there are a lot of former players who would get really, really upset that the Bayliss read Dobell, but not always read Atherton or whoever else. But that wasn't Bayliss do what Atherton thought, because he's a former player and he understood that. George came from a different angle, and so Bayliss and George are very different kinds of people, and so he saw something within that outside voice that was really, really important. And we are good areas are the outside voice. Right? I'm not saying we haven't been inside at times, and certainly I have, and Behram's had some good decisions, but we are outsiders in many different ways. And we are going to look at these things from a different point of view. And sometimes I will do just as much analysis on another player, and that player will just look at it and go, that's all complete garbage. And I will have done no less work. Right. Yeah. And they will know why it's not true and whatever. So I just, a big thanks to everyone who has, talked about this with us. And certainly tagged us on social media. The videos have obviously gone viral. Some guy made a video of basically a video in Urdu and repeatedly mentioned as a white guy. They'd be unaware that there were 3 more guys being involved in the project. But thanks to everyone who's sharing everything else. But when it comes down to it, like, we don't want to sit there and go, we fixed Babar Azam. I don't think that's a professional way of putting it. And also don't want to slander all the people who have worked with him, because sometimes it's just the one person with the fresh eyes. And I hadn't looked at Babar Azam technically for 3 years. Maybe it's just easier for me because I had that distance.
Yeah. Also, I mean, of course, there's a sense of pride and happiness with respect to Babar making an adjustment that we kind of wrote about. But more than that, it's just the fact that no one wrote about this before us. No one had broken down Babar's slump before good areas, which is a bigger sense of pride, I suppose, at least with respect to me. And rest assured, if he is in fact a cluster batter, if that theory checks out and he goes on a batting run spree or run scoring spree, then we will build you a statue outside the Gaddafi. I'll build it with my own hands.
I think that's fair. Look, I think, just to finish off on this note, I remember Lawrence Booth saying to me that cricket media is essentially telling you who is about to be dropped from a team. That's like 80%. And part of it is the way that cricket is designed. I won't get into the full details of it, but there's a reason why cricket media is so obsessed by that. It's because the teams are final and there's no substitutions, right?
Yeah.
So it allows you to talk for 5 days, right? About, imagine if you picked this guy, then you would have won the test match. Like, as if the 11th best player has that much of an impact that often. And one thing that we wanted to do, and it's all the way through my work, almost from Cricket with Balls onwards, right? Cricket with Balls had this level of analysis, not always with the visual side of things, but trying to get into it, is we want to talk about cricket. And Babar Azam's toe might be for cricket nerds rather than for, casual cricket fans, but it's a conversation about cricket. And that's really what we want to do on this network. So thanks to everyone who enjoyed that. And yes, Babar, just can you PayPal? Remitly. I think Remitly is a good way of getting money from Pakistan to England.
Yeah. Also, definitely need to discuss that T-shirt idea more with a foot and the toe being Babar's face. I feel like that would sell like hotcakes. Like,
A giant toe batting with Babar's face on it, and we will do a revenue share with Babar.
Yeah, of course. And of course, there has to be the Good Areas logo at the back, just so that people know that that's where the toe came from. Anyway, thank you for all of your super chats, guys, and everyone who was interacting with us in the comments. That's it for this episode of Uncovered. Of course, just a quick reminder to everybody, you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. It can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of this team, whether it be written content, podcasts, or videos. And we'll be back soon enough with another live video, and we've recorded a bunch of foot marks and crick picks as well, so you guys are sorted for content. That is all for this particular episode, though. Have a good one, folks, and goodbye.
Thanks to NV Play's data insights for helping me with this video. They can help any cricket team improve their